by bringing in Mary Maratava and Katie Byrne. Mary is the president of the San Diego County Farm Bureau and grows avocados and coffee in North County. She's also the owner of Agri Service, which processes over 100 tons of organics per year into compost and mulch. Katie is the policy and membership coordinator at the Farm Bureau. She is with them for a while and would be super excited to have you both here. Go ahead, Mary and Katie.
Thank you so much. We're going to have Katie start off and just give you, set the stage for the state of agriculture in San Diego County right now. So I'm going to pass you over to Katie.
All right. Hello, and thank you for having us. Next slide. So just a brief overview of agriculture in San Diego County. We are just shy of 220,000 acres for the year of 2021. That is a 27% decline in acreage in the last decade. So that's continues to rise. Go to the next slide. Farming has a $1.75 billion impact to our economy. We have the 79-acre farm average with a 4-acre median, meaning most of our farms fall between 1 and 9 acres. According to the 2017 Census of Agriculture, 20% of San Diego farms are operated by women, and at least 25% are operated by minority farmers. Next slide. The standard challenges to farming in the region continue to be high cost of land, high cost of water, labor shortage, and the complex regulatory framework. Next slide. The cost of land has more than doubled in the county in the past 20 years. Next slide. And the cost of water has gone up, continues to go up over 65%. New farmers need educational resources through the local colleges and the UC Cooperative Extension, and they have young farmers and ranchers groups for networking. And existing farmers need a solid labor force and reduce barriers to farm worker housing. Streamlined regulatory requirements are needed to assist our farmers in regulatory issues such as the Ag Water Order, Ag Chemical Restrictions and Regulations, General Labor, and Ag Worker Housing.
So this is Mary coming on now. So we have some of the key elements for value-added agriculture. And I'd also like to start out by saying there's talk about the barriers, and one of the barriers that I hear pretty consistently has been the high cost of land, that and it kind of stops right there. But one of the concerns that I have when we look at these barriers to getting more farmers in is that there's the people that have stopped farming, that decline that Katie talked about really was because of the barriers that have come up, and specifically the high cost of water. When I first moved to San Diego County and became involved in agriculture, it was in 1979. And one of the very first meetings I went to was a water use meeting. And the farmers there were protesting because if the price of water went from $77 an acre foot of water, which is about 324,000 gallons, to $80, it was going to put them all out of business. And today our growers are paying anywhere from about $1,200 an acre foot for water to $2,000 an acre foot for water. And what that means to our growers is that for a crop like avocados and citrus, avocados use about 3 acre feet of water per year. And so we have to be really, really careful about how we're using water, because that translates into anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 just for water. It doesn't include things like fertilizer or pest management, weeding, and say harvesting. So it makes it really, really difficult. And so a lot of times when we talk about, not so much with avocados, but with industrialized agriculture, and I think Ellie really hit it on, the nail on the head with this, is that in order to provide food, that there have been choices made along the way, and with industrial farming, and in order to be competitive in a global market for providing food, because our farmers really are faced with having to compete against food being produced cheaper in other countries. And so that is an impediment, that choices are made, and using having larger acreages planted to one crop. One of the ways a farmer reduces his or her expenses is by mechanizing, and the mechanization is really different for different kinds of crops, and it isn't really all that conducive to what we're talking about with the carbon farming, and because it involves tillage. So I think that there's choices and that we have to make in and how we supply an affordable food supply for people. None of this is very easy to come up with. Next slide, please. So some of the key elements, we're really unique in San Diego County because we have the ability to, with these smaller farms, we have one of the best climates in the world for growing things. And I always like to say, if you can't grow it in San Diego County, you probably can't grow it anywhere. It is a great place to be. But some of the things that would be helpful to our farmers, and we have about 1,400 members, 1,600 members. So we have quite a few members, would be to partner relationships with local vendors. And that can be done through the farmer market system or through local grocery stores, because most people still are going to be buying their food at grocery stores. Based on the high cost of water, due to the high cost of water, being able to set up things like agritourism and have it be have that be a second sort of income for our growers is really a great idea. So some of the examples for that would be like the Carlsbad flower fields, the Carlsbad strawberry farms, and various other agritourism opportunities. And one of the things that we have to be really careful with on that is not putting up barriers. And one of the barriers, that we see are things like the BMT. And, we've worked with the county to say, okay, well, it doesn't make sense if we have agritourism, something like a winery that needs to have a major use permit to have to pay upfront for VMT. And there have been some modifications made in the county regulations. And we really appreciate that. But, initially we're hearing, okay, well, if you have a winery, which definitely helps improve your bottom line, you could have anywhere from a $4 million to a $10 million mitigation fee, $10 million mitigation fee up front just to get permits. And so, we need to really streamline the whole permitting process for these things. And another really great source of that we have growers using are school field trips. So having classes come out and learn about soils. The Carlsbad flower fields does a really great job at this, and it's sometimes the only introduction that kids really get to understand how a plant grows. And so I've participated in leading some of those groups, and it really is very, very satisfying. So next slide. So how can we positively affect climate change? I love the idea of sequestering carbon while producing food. My background is in soils. I love the carbon cycle and all of the opportunity. And again, Ellie, you really hit a lot of this right where it needs to be. And we can sequester carbon while producing food. So one of the things that I love about avocados and citrus is that because they're evergreen, it's an evergreen permanent crop, they're sequestering up to 2 tons of carbon per acre. And that 2 tons of carbon per acre, when you look at the amount of acreage that we've lost with avocados and citrus over the past few years, which is, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 acres in the past decade, is that 20,000 tons of carbon really is significant when we think about how that affects our community. And it has been nearly 1 million trees. And so it seems like to me like it would be a benefit to the urban sector to say, oh, well, let's keep these trees in and let's figure out what we have to do about the cost of water, because it really is the cost of water that is putting most of our growers out of business. So what can we do about keeping those trees in? Because it doesn't matter if it's an ornamental tree in the city or it's a tree that's sequestering, that it's producing food out in the rural area, it is still sequestering carbon. But the difference is that the government doesn't have to pay for it. So nobody has to put it into their budget for watering and maintenance. And so that is a savings to the urban sector in not having to maintain the trees. And if we could find some way of monetizing that for growers, I think that would be something that would really help offset those high water costs. And again, I know I'm repeating everything you said, Ellie, but sourcing food locally is really important, and we have to make people understand the value in that. And so how do we get people to understand that if something is coming up from Chile, it has a completely different carbon footprint than something that we're producing here locally? Next slide. Improving profitability. Again, the monetary incentive for carbon sequestration would be a big help to growers. We need to work with the proper authorities to stabilize water prices. And it's not, there's another side to the water thing too, is that agriculture is really important in helping in the way our water system has been set up, that if we lose too much agriculture, it really puts a lot of burden on the urban sector to come up with paying for all of the infrastructure that agriculture is actually helping pick up the cost off now. And we have to incentivize those local purchases. So having school districts use local food is super, super important. Having our institutions, our government institutions, using local food local food sources would be a move in the right direction. I know that there was a bill, I don't remember the name of it, that kind of died somewhere along the way last year, but it was really disappointing that it didn't get the momentum that it really needed, so that people understand that if we can't get our public services to use local purchases, it's really hard to figure out how we're going to get the general community to use local purchases of food. Next slide, please. So we also want to make sure that we're providing a safe and secure work environment for employees. We want to have green consciousness on farms, which means using things like fertilizers and chemicals only when we absolutely need to. We need to have living wages, and we really need to reduce barriers for farm worker housing. It's really hard to have farm workers to find the kind of housing that we need where people can work on farms and raise their families. Right now, most of our farmers are complaining that they have a hard time finding people when it's time for things like, labor for harvest. And so if we had better farm worker housing, I think that it would make a big difference. Next slide. I think there wasn't there, it was just a thanks and any questions slide.
Thank you very much, Mary and Katie. Really appreciate you're presenting here about how the farming community can be a partner in addressing climate change, particularly what was some of the suggestions you had we can work with, and we wanted to hear a little bit more. For example, about sourcing food locally. You mentioned some examples such as school districts and government institutions. So with that, with the information that you have gathered, could you highlight ideas or suggestions similar to that for action in terms of decarbonizing the food system locally?
So I think that's one of the really difficult things to do, because there's a disconnect between the farmer. The farmer is usually selling through a retailer or a broker. And so there's a few steps difference there. And I think just in business, basically, people are always going to go with the cheapest source. And it's, even though they say, oh, we're going to use local food, they go with the cheaper source. And it goes back, I was looking at the chat where, John, thanks for a great question on why farmers don't raise the price of their products. Here's the dilemma in farming, is that you never know what you're going to get for your product until you sell it. And there's a lot of things that happen along the way. I mean, the growers get the best prices for their product when there's a disaster in like a hurricane or a freeze or something with their competitors. That's what raises the price of products, or having a scarcity of the product. And it makes it really difficult for a farmer, because he has pretty set costs, but doesn't know what they're going to get. And just using avocados as an example, the grower price on avocados has ranged anywhere from, in the past few years, from about $1.25 a pound to $3 a pound. And that's a big difference when you're talking about the return to the grower, because he doesn't, or she doesn't know. The grower will not know what their price is and what their income is going to be until after the fruit is harvested. And a lot of times when we talk about waste in the field, and it's not so much an issue here in San Diego County, but in some of the larger vegetable growing areas, they talk about the food being left in the field. And yes, gleaners sometimes do come in, but the problem to the grower is that if it costs more to pick, cool, and transport than you're going to get for that crop at the point towards the end of harvest, then it doesn't make any sense to pick the crop if it's going to end up in a deficit for you. And that's really the way our system's set up. And it's a bigger problem, I think, than most people realize. It's not that somebody is trying to be wasteful. It's just that it doesn't make sense economically.
Thank you, Mary. So you had mentioned monetary incentives for carbon sequestration, and that's kind of interesting dilemma here in San Diego County, where the county has the largest number of small farms in the entire country. So for a small farmer, how do we make it competitive economically? And if you have any kind of case studies from outside our region or examples of farmers here that have utilized those kind of financial incentives, could you tell us about it?
So there really aren't. I'm not sure what financial incentives you're talking about. Can you explain which financial incentives you're?
I'm talking about carbon, buying carbon credits.
Okay,
for,
so
yeah.
I've done some research on this, and I'm a little bit confused about it, because what I found was $30, in the neighborhood of $30 per ton of CO2. Is that what you're hearing? So it makes a lot of sense if you've got 1,000 acres of corn that you're putting into no-till ag, and you've got you're sequestering 3 tons of carbon per acre, but in like with the types of crops and vegetable crops that we're growing, avocados, which are probably some of the most efficient carbon sequesters, are it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 and maybe up to 3 tons per acre. And the problem with that is that when you're paying $1,200 an acre foot for water, which is say $4,000 a year, that extra $90 that you get, $60 to $90, it isn't going to make a whole lot of difference. So I'm not sure how we can work that. I'd really love to be involved in that discussion, though, to see how we can make the economics work. I do know, though, that, like when we talk about using like compost for like the Marin project and the 100,000 acres that we have of rangeland, that is an opportunity for carbon sequestration. But the problem that we have again is that rangeland has a value of somewhere to the grower of $50 per acre per year. And for a grower to buy compost, to transport compost, and to spread compost, and do it at say an inch thick or half an inch thick. I guess the Marin project, I had done my calculations on an inch, which I think is a really reasonable agronomic rate. It was about $3,000 per acre. So how do we get the, using producer responsibility like we do in the electronics industry, get that industry to pay for getting it out there and doing that spreading? And I know that there's some groups like Zero Foodprint that we've worked with that have found a way to kind of monetize the SB 1383 requirements so that growers can take advantage of that.
Thank you, Mary. We're running a little bit over, but if you can very briefly respond to this, because I need to open up the discussion on regional collaboration, and the Farm Bureau is a perfect stakeholder in this question about water. So with the circular economy, there are a variety of stakeholders, including every resident in this region and business and worker. So what potential role do you see the county playing in the context of water, and given the drought and the supply issues, to bring everyone together for regional action?
I don't know how to answer that. I think that's I think that's the purpose of getting all the great minds here together, is hearing those ideas. The agriculture uses about 10% of our water. Most of our water is imported, and the vast majority of it is imported from the Colorado River. So, we run out of water, but we also, and that means we don't grow anything. We have very, very little well water here in San Diego County, and most of it's really salty, and it's not acceptable for most crops. So I think it makes it really difficult to try and the water issue is a huge issue.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate your time and answering the questions. I think there are several leads here. We're going to follow up with you. Anthony, if you can wait until Dr. Doshi presents, I'll appreciate it. So finally, I have Dr. Ami Doshi.